What's up, guys? This is Kephas. So this is something that I've actually been wanting to do for quite a while as well. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, we did a tier list where I ranked the best to worst classes to level up in World of Warcraft. Kind of like the easiest to worst. And that got a really good response. People seemed to really enjoy that, and I had a lot of fun making it, so I thought we'd do that yet again. Except this time, we're going to be ranking the expansions in World of Warcraft from what I feel are the best to the worst. And so it's kind of like all of the expansions from Vanilla WoW all the way to Battle for Azeroth. And so I'm going to rank them. Feel free to leave comments below about what you think of my list and what you think are the best to worst expansions. How would you rank them in a tier list if it was you doing it? And feel free to just talk about different things that we're going to discuss in this video. There is a lot to talk about when it comes to WoW expansions. It's something that I've thought about for a very long time over the years, and I have a lot that I can say. So I hope that I'm not too long-winded, but it is a lot to go over, so I do apologize if this video does run a little bit long. But with that being said, let's get right into it. We're going to start from the very first iteration of WoW all the way to the last. We're going to go in that order. So the first game is World of Warcraft, or WoW Vanilla, WoW Classic, whatever you want to call it. It is the beginning, the original World of Warcraft game, which came out in 2004, and I did not start playing it until 2006. I didn't even know what WoW was until 2006. So I kind of come into this a little bit late. I may not be the best authority on the original game, but I do remember it quite a bit. I would say that most of the time I spent in Vanilla WoW was actually during the Burning Crusade period of the game, because that expansion had come out shortly after I started playing WoW, but I was still really heavily involved in the original content. I didn't even know what an expansion was until long after the expansion had been released, because I didn't know anything. So I may not know the best, the most accurate knowledge about the original game other than just the content itself. I may not know what it was like at the time, but what I do remember quite well is that it was a very long process to level up characters, and there was a lot of depth in the world because of that, because there was so much involved with leveling. I don't even think a lot of people really experienced endgame back then. I think it was like a very small percentage of people that actually got into endgame. For most people, the game was about leveling, and it made the world seem vast and very dangerous because the content was a lot harder. So before I get into more about the expansion, I'm going to put it at A, because I do believe that Vanilla WoW was a very solid experience. I think it still can be a very solid experience, and I'm going to look forward to exploring that theory once WoW Classic is released and people start getting into that, including myself. I'm very happy to go back and revisit this content as it was, because I missed out on a lot of it. But what I do feel is that it was a very solid experience. I'm not going to put it at S, I'm putting it at A, because I do believe that there were improvements to be made, and I do believe that those improvements were made. But I do miss the novelty of Vanilla WoW. I miss a dangerous world. I miss a more involved leveling experience. I remember back in those days being in guilds, having a friends list, and seeing people in content that I had not been to yet, and being really hyped to go there. And so that's the kind of thing I really miss. I remember thinking back then that I would never have more than one max level character. And back then it was a very heavy, involved process. It wasn't like it is now where you can level up a character in a couple of weeks. It was a lot more involved. You had a lot more time investment, and even more than time was effort, because again, it was very challenging. So I miss that. I miss that kind of game. I don't think it's just nostalgia. I think there is something to that kind of gameplay that is more, more dangerous, more testing, that kind of thing, more of an investment over time. And I didn't have a lot of time to play back then. I was in college. I had a lot of involvement with my church, as much time as I do now, being married, and I still enjoyed the game. So a lot of the things that people say about it back then, that it's just something for back then, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think that it still could be fun. One of the things that I would say that maybe were a little bit rough for Vanilla, some of the classes were just not well made. I don't feel like paladins were really horrible to level up back then. I think that there were a lot of improvements made for them. There were some other things with classes that were improved upon, but the base ideas that were there with classes and just all the things that you had to do, all the cool class quests, exploring the world, getting your druid forms is something that I remember, getting hunter pets, doing the pet quest, that kind of stuff. I remember that very well, and I remember that very fondly. I remember not having a hunter pet at first, and I didn't care. It was something to look forward to. That was a part of the game that I really enjoyed, and I remember leveling up at first it was a dwarf hunter, and doing that hunter quest was really cool. So I was very much involved in the old game, and it was good enough that it hooked me. So I think Vanilla WoW is a solid experience. I think there's a lot of novelty there. I think it was like a great, opening into this new world, and it was built on from there. And that was followed up with Burning Crusade, which I do believe are when the first wave of improvements were made. I think that BC is a step above Vanilla, just in terms of the improvements that were made to classes. The gaming experience was a little bit improved upon, especially at endgame. There were a lot more people that were getting involved with the endgame experience, with raids and dungeons there at the end. That kind of stuff I think was a good thing for the overall experience of the game. I don't necessarily feel like that every single person, or even myself, should experience every piece of content. I don't agree with that mentality. That's a mentality that is there. I don't really agree with that. It's something that I feel that way ever since I remember when my cousin started playing WoW in Cataclysm, and he started playing. He leveled up a character in like 2 or 3 weeks, and then he went and did the LFR Dragon Soul raid, and he looked at me and said, "Wow, this is a game that you spent years playing. I just beat the game in a matter of weeks." And yeah, you can say, "Well, that was the easy mode," but it wasn't the same, because like part of the motivation to get through a game is seeing that stuff and exploring and experiencing more content. And when you're able to just plow through it very easily and very quickly on any level, it kind of takes away from the experience, I think. And that's something that the old game did better than I feel the new game does. I grew up playing games that I never beat and still love them because they were hard. And there was a mystery involved, and there was something to look forward to, that one day I will finish this, that kind of thing. And that was how WoW used to be. There was so much intrigue, and it was a big, big mountain to climb, and it was fun to climb it because there was so much to do. And I think that BC, did bring the reins in a little bit, and I think that's good. I mean, you could say that Vanilla was a bit too difficult for everyone, but I think that BC did bring the reins in some. It made it a little bit more, I don't want to use the A word, accessible, but it did make it more, something that more people could enjoy. There was still a lot of challenge, though, and I think that's a good thing. Unlocking dungeons and getting through them, and all the different areas to go to, and then the dailies, the Isle of Quel'Danas dailies, that was fun. I remember doing a lot of PvP and getting marks to get my gear back then. I had a lot of fun with that. And just the world itself, Burning Crusade Outland was very different from, the world that we had been in all this time up to this point with, Azeroth. Here, I remember going through the Dark Portal for the first time and having my mind blown, because I go into this portal and there's lava shooting through the grounds, there's this insane skybox, giant demons running around, and of course I was on a PvP server, so all of a sudden 4 Horde guys flew down and instantly ganked me, and I died. And that was my first experience coming into Outland, and it was incredible. It was very memorable. I laughed, thought it was really funny, and then I knew I was kind of screwed because, now you had people flying around that were a threat, so you never knew when someone was going to just drop in and take you out. So that was something about Outland. It was kind of crazy. And, and flying, at that time was really cool. It was a big effort to unlock it. Not everybody had it back then. It was something you had to work towards. People would get flying, but epic flying was a lot harder. It was only something that you could do in Outlands as well, so that was kind of nice. So it wasn't like it is like what was later, where it was just you could fly everywhere and it took away from the game. Back then it was kind of nice because it took a lot of effort to get it, and so it was a very good reward for, you know, the casual player or for the every player to work towards. So I think overall BC was better. I think it improved on classes. It added Blood Elves and Draenei, which was a great addition, giving each faction every class. I think that was a good thing. Some people disagree, but I think that was good for the sake of player choice and allowing people to stay loyal to a certain faction. You don't want to force people to play a certain faction because they want to play a certain class. That's just as bad as the gender locking for classes in other MMOs. I can't stand that kind of stuff. So I think that was an improvement. So overall, I think that BC was a much better experience. One of the best experiences that WoW has ever had. S-class expansion. But then we get Wrath of the Lich King. And you guys probably already know this about me. I'm going to put that right in step with BC. And in fact, I'm putting it a little bit above BC. I would say that if there were more ranks here, I would give Wrath an SS rank or an S plus rank, and BC would be an S rank. So I feel that the first 3 expansions were a continuous improvement over the others, but I do feel that there were some things about Wrath that were not so good, even though I still think overall it was a much better experience, because once again, Wrath kind of pulled in the reins a lot more and allowed more content to be available and attainable for more people, which was a good thing, because in Wrath you had such a good story experience with the Lich King and you know, everything going on Northrend. It was a very interesting and engaging story. The best story that WoW has ever seen. Like, if they ever do a movie for WoW, it really should be the Lich King story, because that's a story to be told, man. And so you have this memorable continent with great music. I mean, you've got, you know, Grizzly Hills, Howling Fjord, that music. You know, you got the floating city of Dalaran. You know, all this stuff going on, all kinds of cool crafted things to get, like the Mechano Hog. You know, you had the Death Knights in, which was a big deal. That was really exciting, man. And I think that this is where a lot of the really good improvements to classes came in as well, because they added in glyphs and they added in a little bit more depth to, you know, to classes, allowing you to, like, you know, add even more customization and choosing glyphs, which was really cool. I remember loving my Paladin at this time. This is when I really got sold on Paladins, because this was like the best time to be a Paladin, was during Wrath of the Lich King. So I really enjoyed Wrath. I think that it was the best expansion. I think the dungeon system from Wrath with the emblems or badges or whatever they were at the time was the best system that we've ever had. It is something that you could work towards. You just do heroics, and I remember at first heroics were hard, but they became progressively easier as you got more powerful, and that was a very rewarding experience. And then, you know, you get into the raids, and my first raid ever was Ulduar. That was when I started getting into raids, and it's the most memorable raid, not only because it was the first, but because in my opinion, it's the most well designed. It's when they added in the cool mechanics for hard mode. You know, pressing a button or getting the heart down to 0 so that you get this crazy hard mode added. And they never did this again after Ulduar. I guess because they decided it was too much effort to put that kind of mechanic in every single fight in a raid from that day forward. So they went with an easier option, which was just click a menu option. And it's kind of boring in my opinion. It's good for the people that don't like to put effort into it and they just want to, you know, a simple experience. But for me, I think that it was more creative and more interesting to add hard modes into the raid itself. It's just the best raid that we've ever had. Nothing in my mind comes close to Ulduar. Just like in my mind, not much comes close to Wrath. I think it's the best we've ever had. Killing the Lich King was the best feeling I've ever had playing WoW. Just, man, it was a good experience. I would say that I think that some people might make the argument that Wrath did pull the reins in too much in terms of making the game a little bit too easy. There's the term Wrath Babies was thrown out a lot back then, and it is a hard balance. I guess I could see where some people might feel that way. You know, it's hard to say, but I would say that I guess the right balance is somewhere between BC and Wrath, in my opinion. Where that way, you know, people, it's attainable. It's not insane, like, loops that you have to go through. It's not like an insane time investment, but it's still something that you have to work towards and put effort in, and it's still challenging. And I think that's the sweet spot. For me, Wrath was the sweet spot. Is when I was most engaged with the game. Unfortunately, Wrath did add the Dungeon Finder, which is one of the most, you know, debated systems ever added. Depending on what you value in the game is going to determine what you think of the Dungeon Finder. But I don't, I don't know. I don't think it was the best addition overall. I think that it's hurt the social aspect of the game. I think it's hurt content because Blizzard has had to cater to the lack of engagement between players, and so, dungeons are less challenging overall because of it. There's less coordination needed. They've added in content that doesn't require coordination, making it more boring. And I think that Wrath was the last great time to be involved with dungeons and raids because of it. So that's my take on that. But I don't necessarily fault Wrath overall for that. And I also think that people also see Wrath as kind of the beginning of the downturn because this is where they started to pull back the reins too much, making the game more casual friendly. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that if they had stopped at Wrath and started building on from there, things would have been fine. But unfortunately, they kept plowing forward with the direction, making the game way more casual friendly, way more, arcadey, less, immersive, less engaging, that kind of thing. And that's what's been a problem. But if they had stopped at Wrath, I think things would have been fine. But I think the sweet spot is definitely somewhere between Wrath and BC. I think those are the two great expansions, and I think overall the original trilogy, the Vanilla, BC, and Wrath, are the best WoW experiences that there has ever been for the game, and everything after that, even though it's going to be on this same list, it's a major step down. So imagine like 3 more bars below Vanilla where I'm going to tier these out. So it'd be more like E, F, G over B, C, and D in my mind. I really do think there's a major discrepancy between the original 3 and what we've gotten since then. That's my opinion, and I don't apologize for it. But having said that, let's move on to these next batch. Okay, so Cataclysm is next. And I actually think that Cataclysm is one of the worst expansions we've ever had. There's a lot of good that was added. I think the Worgen and the Goblins were really cool additions as races. They were really fun to play, and the Worgen was crazy. I never thought we'd ever get anything like that. And their storylines and their starting zones were really cool. And, of course, Blizzard did a lot of work reforging the world into the world that we have now. Which was a bittersweet thing. I don't think it was necessarily a bad thing. I think that actually it's mostly a good thing. Even though I do miss certain aspects of the old world, I think that they improved the questing experience overall. It was a more coherent, streamlined questing experience, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. There is a novelty in going to a hub, picking up like 20 quests, going and doing them, and then turning them all in. But for a more coherent storyline that you can follow in a zone, I think that Cataclysm did a better job. It's a little bit more on rails, but it tells a better story and it's easier to follow. So I don't think either way is better or worse, as long as, if they had continued making the content challenging and made it feel like the world was dangerous, it would have been fine. But one of the problems is that they started making things a little bit too easy, and, questing kind of became a little bit of a brain dead experience unless you were following the story. But, if you're on your third character, you're not following the story anymore. So that's kind of one of the problems. On top of that, they did so much work in reforging the old world that the end game suffered because there wasn't anything to do. It was really hard to stay interested if you only had max level characters. Guess what? At this point, World of Warcraft had been out for several years. We were in the 4th iteration now, and most people had already leveled up characters and weren't interested in leveling up any more characters. So a lot of people didn't even care about the reforged old world. They moved right into the end game and were sharply disappointed. Even though the raids were there, they were kind of fun. I thought that the Firelands content was pretty good, but overall it was just it was rough. If you were just focusing on endgame back then, that's what really hurt the expansion. On top of that, there were some major changes to classes and how class progression worked in Cataclysm. And I think, if I remember right, this was the expansion where they changed the talent trees. I may be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it is the expansion where they added in like holy power for paladins, and they added in like they changed hunters to no longer use bullets. You didn't need a quiver anymore. Pets just kind of became a drone that followed you. You didn't have to take care of them. They just were just kind of there. That kind of stuff. I think a lot of that really hurt the way classes were played. Even though they were trying to make the rotations more gimmicky and more interesting, I think overall class fantasy, class flavor kind of suffered, and things were a lot more homogenized, and that was kind of unfortunate. So I think that was another big slight on Cataclysm. Overall, I just feel like it was a really bad experience, really forgettable and incredibly boring. They tried their best, but overall, I just think they failed. But then they tried something else with Mists of Pandaria, and I actually think the Mists of Pandaria is a pretty solid expansion. Honestly, I think that people fault it for being too kiddie and cartoony. I think Mists of Pandaria is kind of like the Wind Waker of WoW. Wind Waker was a Zelda game, came out after Majora's Mask when the GameCube was released, and people were expecting a gritty Zelda experience, like kind of edgy and dark, and what they got was Wind Waker, which was a colorful, kind of happy, beautiful world, cel-shaded, cartoony, with a little kid Link, and people took one look at it and thought it was going to suck, and didn't even give it a chance, and what ends up happening is that Wind Waker turned out to be an incredible game that these days people look back on and think, man, that was that's one of the best Zelda games, a lot of people's favorites. And so I think a lot of people look at Mists of Pandaria and say that it is objectively bad for subjective opinions, which are, well, this is dumb. I wanted to be edgy, and I want undead and dark and sweaty orcs and muscly men with big axes and spikes, and that's what I want. If I don't get that, then it's obviously going to suck, and I don't think that's not correct. I mean, that's just, you're allowed to not like it if you're not into the theme, but you can't say that the theme is bad. It's not bad. It was actually really well done, and it fit well in the world. People say that pandas are just a ripoff of Kung Fu Panda, and yeah, maybe, but, orcs versus humans are a ripoff of Tolkien. That's nothing new to the World of Warcraft experience. It's always been the case. I think that pandas fit in really well with the world. They're really fun to play. Adding the monk in was really cool, and personally, one of my favorite trailers is the Mists of Pandaria trailer. I loved it, but I like that kind of thing. I really enjoyed it, and it was a breath of fresh air. We got a lot of new lore with the Shah, the Mogu, the Pandaren, the Klaxi, or whatever they were called, the Mantid. That's it. I thought all that was really interesting, and probably some of the better lore that we've seen in a while in WoW. It wasn't like Lich King level, but it was still really good, and I thought it was a nice breath of fresh air. And then you had the heel turn of Garrosh, which was, as much as I loved Garrosh and hated to see him go full baddie, it was still a pretty well executed storyline, and raiding Orgrimmar was kind of cool at that time. So I think overall, Mists of Pandaria, theme-wise, the zones were really memorable. The content itself was really good. But what hurt Mists of Pandaria was the lack of in-game content. They added in some really cool dungeons and some great raids, but there wasn't anything else to do that was interesting. The farm was nice, but they just kind of seemed to think that we'll just put, dailies all over the world, and you can farm rep through that and grind that out, and that'll be enough. And it wasn't. People were getting burned out on dailies. We had dailies since Burning Crusade, and it just wasn't enough to keep people interested and engaged. And that's what really hurt the expansion. And on top of that, you had very long patch cycles. The end, Siege of Orgrimmar was notoriously way too long. And so I remember people were really enjoying Timeless Isle when it first came out, and after a few months they were burned out, and that was I think that whole content lasted for over a year. So that was what really hurt the expansion, was just lack of engaging content and taking too long to get new content out, and a lack of just in-game systems. I think that if Mists of Pandaria had the Legion systems with world quests, that kind of stuff, and maybe some more flavor quests for classes or something, I think Mists of Pandaria would have been a much better expansion, but it was held back because of the lack of systems. So I still think it was great. It's still one of my favorite places to go visit in the game to this day, but it just was kind of boring, unfortunately. That's sad. Unless you were into the raids, they were really good, and the dungeons were really good as well. But just on the day-to-day, for people that weren't into that kind of stuff, there just wasn't enough to do, unfortunately. And so now we move on to the last three, and I just want to point something out. I feel like Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria, what hurt them the most was just a lack of in-game content. I think that's because they had sped up the whole process so much in terms of getting to the end and making things so easy, but they failed to add interesting systems at the end game. So it's kind of like, this was the transitional period from old school WoW to the WoW that we know now, the more modern WoW, and I think that's what hurt both Mists of Pandaria and Cataclysm, was that they were transitional, awkward teen years of WoW, kind of. So they were going through these changes, and they hadn't found their stride. And honestly, a lot of people might argue that they still haven't found their stride. And also, Mists of Pandaria was really the last time that we would get a significant amount of original content added to WoW in terms of story and stuff like that. Everything from here on out, from Warlords on, has been a lot of fan service and not a lot of originality, in my opinion. So we're going to get into that, but we're going to move on to Warlords of Draenor. Speaking of, nostalgia cash-ins and fan service, that's exactly what Warlords of Draenor was. And in my opinion, it is the worst expansion that World of Warcraft has ever had, primarily because of garrisons and Apexis crystals. Again, the end game in this expansion was the least compelling that we had ever had. It was, I guess technically it was a little bit more than what we had gotten before, but it was insulting because the Garrison was basically a Facebook game or a mobile game at the time, and it was very frustrating that this is all we were given. You log in, you send your followers out on missions, and you log out. People weren't engaging in the world, they weren't engaging with each other, they weren't doing anything unless it was a raid or a dungeon and then just sitting in your garrison, and it sucked. For a game like World of Warcraft, which is an MMO, this did not feel like an MMO, and it really was, it's very much hated to this day as being one of the worst expansions, the worst expansion that WoW has ever had. They tried something new, but they should have known what was going to happen, and it's sad that they were trying to defend it at first. You have to remember, too, this is when legacy servers were coming up, and people were playing on Nostalrius and playing classic WoW there and being into that kind of thing, and Blizzard shut that down, and then somebody at BlizzCon asked for legacy servers, and they get condescended to by the guy who's now the president saying, you don't want to play classic, you want to play this garbage that we're shoveling in your face called Warlords of Draenor. And so it was very contentious, it was very volatile. The community at that time was very frustrated because, man, what a horrible, just garbage expansion that Freudian slip, that Warlords of Draenor was there. What was good about it, though? There were some good things. It was nice to visit Draenor and revisit characters. It's nice to have some fan service, I suppose. It's kind of funny because, if Miss was the Wind Waker of WoW, then I would say that Warlords is definitely the Twilight Princess. A lot of people who like Zelda are going to hate me, but Twilight Princess was the follow-up of Wind Waker, and like Warlords of Draenor, it was very edgy, very dark, very gritty, and overall it was a kind of a weak Zelda experience. Some people like it, some people really enjoy it, but I think most people were kind of let down by the actual game itself. Being edgy isn't enough for everybody. That doesn't make it good, that doesn't make it interesting. It's just edgy for edgy's sake, and that's kind of what Warlords was. Yeah, you have this savage land with these savage orcs and spikes and muscles everywhere, but hey, the gameplay's not there. It's boring. You've got this convoluted timeline story arc with alternate worlds now, and it's messing with the world and the story and the world that we're in. That kind of stuff can break things, adding all kinds of plot holes, reintroducing characters that really shouldn't be there, that have already been around and their stories have already been told, so it's already kind of weak. And then the story got broken up and rushed through, and things were omitted because they wanted to get the heck out of Warlord expansion as quickly as possible because of how much it was hated. So we only got 2 major patches, and then we got that horrible selfie patch. Oh my god. Everything about Warlords just was terrible. Aside from the questing experience and the cutscenes, oh my god, it was just god-awful, man. Fortunately, they followed that up with Legion, which was a much better expansion. I would say that Legion was better than Miss. And I don't know if it was good because it followed up Warlords, or if it was good for what it was. I think it was probably the best modern WoW experience we've had. It's not anywhere close to the original trilogy, but it's way better than anything we've had since the original trilogy. Legion fixed a lot of the problems that Warlords had. It did keep the mission table, the followers, and that kind of stuff, but it really, pulled the reins in on that, not making it such a major part of the game. And honestly, it made the mission table more useful for people, and especially when it came to making money, which was fine. But it was separate from the in-game experience. They added in the artifact weapons, which at that time was fun because it was like the old school talent trees. So it was interesting to keep grinding out, basically experience to level those things up. They added all kinds of class-specific content, class quest lines, artifact weapon skins, class sets, class mounts. All that stuff was great stuff. And then they added in, the Mage Tower, which was great solo content that people really enjoyed. There was a lot to unlock and a lot to experience, and I think that overall people really enjoyed their time in Legion because it had a lot of good in-game systems. It introduced world quests, which worked out really well for Legion because of the things that you could get from them, and it was pretty compelling. I don't think that content-wise it was very strong. I did like the class stuff, and the class order halls were really cool. I don't think that the Broken Isles itself, the zones themselves, were very memorable. The storyline was okay. There were some pretty big deaths, some pretty emotional moments, which was nice. But overall, it was fine. It was serviceable. But I think what really sold Legion was the gameplay and the systems. I was a lot more invested throughout the expansion in Legion, even though I didn't raid, because I had a lot going on in my life at the time. I was still very much invested in things to do. It added a lot of compelling solo content, and I honestly think that's a good thing. I think that, the way that you fix it is to keep group content as it used to be and add more compelling solo content, and you might have something there. So I think Legion is probably the best experience we have had in modern WoW. And that was followed up and kind of proven by BFA, which I think is... some people say it's as bad, if not worse, than Warlords. I don't think that's true. I don't even think it's as bad as Cataclysm. I think that it's better than Cataclysm, but I don't think it's as good as Mists of Pandaria. It's not a bad expansion. It's somewhere between B and C for me. There's a lot of cool things with BFA. A lot of the compounding issues of WoW are starting to really hit the game in BFA. Very homogenized, just gutted class designs are starting to really show, especially in BFA when they gutted classes even more. Classes just aren't fun to play like they used to be. A lot of the old tried and true systems, even world quests, have kind of gotten boring. There's a useless mission table that is, at this point, just a shell of what it was, completely pointless. And, they've built all of these systems on another artifact leveling system with the Heart of Azeroth, and it doesn't work because of how they've implemented it. With the gear, it just doesn't work. It's horrible. It's not fun. And when they build the entire game on that system, it hurts the game. There's so much RNG to it. There's so much RNG involved in gearing up now that it's just not compelling anymore. And it hurts the game, I think. Storyline, the main storyline in BFA is such a shoehorn thing just to try to cash in on the Alliance versus Horde thing again and bring back characters that, more nostalgia, more fan service, and it's not engaging. It's probably, the BFA main storyline is probably the worst, lowest point in the story writing for World of Warcraft. The people that are writing this story need to either wake up or be replaced. It is garbage. It's terrible storytelling, it's fan service, it's rehashing, and it's garbage. But the smaller scale storylines, like in Zandalar with the Zandalari trolls, the Vol'dun storyline, that stuff is really good. The stuff on Kul Tiras with the Kul Tiran humans, the Drustvar storyline, all really good stuff. The zones are amazing. Some of the most memorable zones that I think have ever been in the game. I love the zones. I want to explore them more, but unfortunately there's not a lot for me to do it in-game this time. Even though there's stuff there, none of it is compelling. I mean, the war fronts are the worst content that's ever been added. I think war fronts are worse, almost worse than garrisons, because they're not designed for you to fail. They're designed for you to succeed with the least amount of effort. That's not compelling. I mean, there are a handful of people that will appreciate that kind of content. Most people, even casual players, want a certain level of challenge, I feel. And I don't think that Warfronts from the get-go, I think the mentality behind them was a failure. Island expeditions are a little bit better in terms of what they are, but the rewards just aren't there. So overall, I think Warlords of Draenor, there's I'm sorry, I get Warlords of Draenor and BFA mixed up a lot. I apologize. I think BFA has some good, and there were a lot of good ideas on paper, and I think it's cool that they're trying new things. But I think what BFA shows is that I don't think we're going to get a better experience than Legion if Blizzard keeps going in the direction they're going with WoW, and I think it's time that they consider a new direction and try something different. Otherwise, it's just going to keep going downhill. I think that's overall the issue. I think they need to rethink, you know, how they scale the game in terms of simplicity and engagement with questing and that kind of stuff, and leveling up characters, with how they design classes. They need to rethink RNG with gear. All that stuff needs to be rethunk, and they need to look back at how they used to do things and see what they can do with the old school WoW, and how they can re-implement some of that in the game without making it too jarring and suddenly way too difficult for the audience that they have. But overall, I know this has been a long video, a lot of it can be long-winded at times, but this is overall how I feel about World of Warcraft, how I would rank each expansion, and where I feel they fit in comparison to one another. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave comments about what you think of my tier list and what your tier list would be, and if you have any ideas of your own for tier lists that you would like to see me do, or any videos in general that you would like to see me do, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by clicking that like button. And feel free to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. Don't forget, you can subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as new videos are posted. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter, and if you'd like, you can support this channel on Patreon. Links to all of this can be found in the description below. This is Kephas. Until next time.